Dire Straits style guitar solo that is
nice.
Very, very epic. But yeah, thank you.
Amazing. Yeah, I mean, the mix just sounds super full, punchy. Love the kick, love the drums and the bass. It's got like that 80s sound, but with that full low end that we all love today.
Yeah. Well,
none of those 80s cocaine top end, mixes.
That's right.
You know what I'm talking about.
Oh, I do. The classic 80s cocaine mix. Yeah, I mean, the story on that song is kind of the story of that whole record, which, Corey and I do a ton of work together. And we just kind of, it's his solo project, obviously. And he wrote so many songs, and he's like never really found like his voice. He's like had so many like projects and bands, and he plays in a band. But he finally found his voice, and it was such a fun time to like explore like what he wanted to do. And basically it was also him and I exploring everything that we wanted to do that we weren't allowed to do when you work with other people. Because, I mean, when you're producing records or you're writing with other people, like there's compromise, right? Everybody needs to be happy. It's the artist vision. And so we were just like, hey, let's do whatever we want. Like, you want to do guitar solos in every song? Yeah, let's do it. That's kind of the backstory of it. So a lot of the mixing, like that mix, if I remember, this is going to sound crazy, but I mean, that mix took like an hour, maybe an hour and 20 minutes.
Wow. That's amazing.
But that's because Corey and I were so deep in just the process. Like the production was a level of mixing, and that's kind of the thing that I like about working with him is he is super hyper musical, and I am like super technical, like very sound frequency oriented. And so when the two of us come together, like the production process is like, what's missing? Yes, we need something in the low mids. So let's build a pad out of the Juno or whatever and put something in the low mids. So like we basically we put those records together to fit together. So that song actually, Corey, I think that's all Corey's production, because we finished this record during the pandemic. So we did like half the record together and then half the record kind of back and forth and remote. And then we would get in rooms together every once in a while. Don't tell anybody we saw people. But but that one, I think he sent me those files and he put that together in just like the most perfect way that it just like fell together. But there's two big elements to that song and that whole record that I think kind of set it apart sonically. And I think when we got on,
sure.
When we got on, you mentioned like, oh, your mix is so punchy. This is so punchy. We got into like aligning the drums and like really, like I'm always been a stickler for like samples, right? So if I'm putting samples in, like I want those samples to be sample accurate. And so I will, print my slate or print my addictive trigger or whatever created the triggers. I will print that, and then I will tab through and make sure that they are all sample accurate, because that level of punch is really what you need. Well, we took that one step further, and I think it was a Tom Lord Alge thing. He aligns like everything to the snare. So it started one day where I was like, dude, let's try this thing. Let's move all the overheads to like the snare and move the rooms, right? Because you never have like a room that's really far away and you push it up, like it sounds dope, but it's like it's sometimes so delayed that you're like, well, it sounds like a delay because it's across the room, right? Or it's like down the hallway. Well, when you take those things and you line them up, they become like another texture that you can layer in. All of a sudden you get the vibe of that room mic, but you don't get that like slap aspect of it, which, the slap aspect is great for when you want it.
Yeah, sometimes it works, yeah.
So exactly, yeah. Sometimes it's exactly what you want. But in this case, like everything started, and then we were also gating things super tight, so everything started to sound like a drum machine before we even put a drum trigger.
Right, I wasn't sure if it was real or programmed drums.
Everybody's cool. Like, what? Is this a drum machine? We're like, no, that's a drummer. And there is a snare sample. There's one snare sample on every song on the record and one kick sample. And they it's not always the same kick and snare, but there is a sample, but they're live, they're live drums as well. But the punch comes from like all that, like we went through and we just chose, the kick, this lined up to the kick sounds like this. We want to do this. And so the drums were recorded all the same kit, same studio, because we had our studio, it was always set up, right? So the drum sounds were basically always the same. And so once we found the formula for the record of like overheads move 22 samples and blah, 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 part of my mix process was to put everything like the hi-hat was lined up to the snare because it made the snare hit harder. And, you know, so that's one aspect. That's something that I'd never done before. And
that's super cool.
It makes it hit so much harder. Now, it's something you can't really do because it changes the sound of those drums significantly. So like if somebody sent me that to mix, it's kind of a delicate, like I can't really move your overheads because you're going to be like, what did you do to my drums? You know, but I'll do a little bit of it in a mix every once in a while, but not to the extent that Corey and I did it. And then the other,
it's just like whatever works, just go for it. You know.
Yeah. So that's, you know, you were setting
the tone of the record, not just mixing a record that had a tone set for it.
Exactly. This was, you know, we did everything that we wanted to do. We did things very drastic. I mean, some of the EQs on that record are disturbing to look at, but like they created space for the vocal, or they created space for the drums. Like that's, you know, this is like the era when we started this like 3 years ago that I really went on this journey of like, you know, change everything else first to make the vocal sit, or change, you know, like if you can't get the bass to sit right, like find the thing that's making the bass not sit right. Because we recorded great sounds, like everything that went in the box sounded great. It's like we weren't trying to fix problems. We were just trying to make the best record we could. And then the other kind of characteristic tone of his album in that song is like an unnecessarily ridiculous amount of SPX 90 and on the vocal, because in the beginning there's a song called Humans, which is really, really good. It was the first single, and that was the first one that I put the SPX 90 on, and Corey left. We'd been working on it for like the whole day and he had to go, and I was like, I'm going to try something weird, and I just went really hard on the SPX 90, and I sent that to Corey at the end of the day, and he just texted me back. He's like, what the fuck did you do? What did you do? And I was like, I put the SPX 90 all over it and distorted it. And he was like, this is it. He's like, we need to go back and like do this to the 3 songs that we're done with. And so that became the drum alignment, and the SPX 90 kind of became the staple, you know,
right. The sonic
staple of the
signature
record.
of the record. Yeah.
And the other signature is that the band is amazing. You know, it's
was it a real bass or is that a synth bass? Because I could not tell.
That song is a synth bass. But Corey's a bass player by trade. He plays bass in the band Bush. So he played all the bass, a lot of the guitars, all the programming or all the keyboards and stuff for him. And then there's a drummer, Nick Hughes, who's just so talented and like energetic. And so like he played all the drums, and then we, you know, didn't quantize it, you know, because he played and Corey played to him, and it's like real people playing music, not like loop based. I mean, we fixed some things, but like it's about the groove in the band. And then the only other player involved was Justin Derrico, who's a ridiculous guitarist. I mean, like just ridiculous. He plays with Pink, and he's just a monster. Mm-hmm. So that like really clean guitar work that is in that and a lot of the other songs, a lot of the guitar solos, that's all Justin, and he's a monster. And he's got an amazing guitar collection. So great guitar, great instruments. Like all the instruments involved were great. All the players were great. And that's like half the work's done. So that's, you know,
nice.
That's the rundown on that song and that record. But yeah.
Well, it sounds awesome, dude. And got to give kudos to Corey. And I know we connected over Bush even in our previous chat before we got on the podcast.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Because 16 Stone was just like a staple of my 8th grade life, and big influence for me.
I had I love that. I like melted that CD. I love that record. So good. They were getting ready for tour a couple years ago, and I met Corey about 6 or 7 years ago. I don't know, maybe less, maybe more. And they were getting ready for tour. And once I knew him pretty well, and like I'd met some of the other guys in the band because we'd worked together. I knew they were rehearsing in our studio, and Corey was home for Christmas, and I got home before him. So I brought home, I found it in North Carolina where I grew up, my bass tab book for 16 Stone. And I left it on the console So I was hoping that like somebody in the band would show up early and there would just be this bass tab book and Corey would be like, that's not mine. But he got there first and he found it. So, better luck next time.
Bummer.
Yeah.
Well, awesome, dude. Well, your work sounds awesome. And it's been so much fun to chat with you and learn from you. And yeah, your stuff sounds awesome. I'm really enjoyed listening to your mixes, and your podcast is great. So people got to go check it out. I'll just ask you a couple more questions before we wrap the episode.
Yeah.
I do want to ask you, we all kind of go through periods of time where we're super pumped to get into the studio. And there are times where we kind of get burnt out and, we don't have energy. Is there anything that you do to kind of either maintain an energy or kind of switch your mood?
I try to take more breaks than I used to. I try to take a break every hour. I've learned that if I feel like I'm not being compensated enough or that I'm not invested in the project, that I have a hard time getting excited about it. So I try when possible to avoid that work and try to stick to work that keeps me inspired. But, it does happen. But generally, I don't have a problem showing up to work and doing the job. But I have found as I get older, the days, to be excited for the whole day, the day needs to be about 6 to 8 hours and not 12 to 16. Get a little cranky around 12 hours now, but yeah.
Yeah, we're not built for that, especially in our 30s.
That's right. Things hurt.
Yeah, amazing. So, my final question for you is a question I've asked everybody on the show. Just kind of looking back on your journey, was there something that you maybe did or didn't do that, Travis today would say, hey, Travis, don't do that. Or maybe, Travis, just keep at that. It's going to work out for you. What would be that one piece of advice that you would tell your earlier self?
Well, luckily, I prepared for this one because I've been listening to your show nonstop for the last couple of weeks. But I think there's a lot of things...
I'm honored, man.
There's a lot of things I touched on, during the conversation. But the one thing that I kind of wanted to say is that skill is not enough to get you there. And kind of like what I mean by that is I spent a long time waiting for things to happen to me. And we kind of touched on this. And, I would, without sounding cocky, I would say that I was a really good runner, but that doesn't mean that I was going to get a promotion, and that I was a really good tracking engineer for the pop sessions. It doesn't mean that I'm going to get the mix or that somebody else is going to hire me. Like, just because you're really good at something, that is unfortunately not enough to set you apart. You need to be a great people person, and you need to be willing to find the level of self-promotion and self-advocacy. So you need to find the way that you can be an advocate for yourself that you're comfortable with, because that's what's going to make the difference. Yes, if you're working in music, you have to be really good at your job, or eventually you won't have any work. But that's not what's going to make you successful or famous or whatever it is. You have to be willing to put yourself out there, and like I said, it feels dirty and it feels weird. That's why you have to find the thing that, works for you. You have to keep in mind that you're the only person that's going to push you forward. No one's going to walk over and grab your hand and be like, cool, this is the way to success. You have to walk that road yourself. And I didn't do that for 10 or 12 years, like I said. So that would be the thing I would tell myself 10 years ago, don't wait for it. Yeah, you can get really good at something. It doesn't mean it's going to work.
Yeah, I'm thinking about myself maybe 7 years ago, sitting with a business coach and being like, yeah, I think I'm basically good enough to do, anything. Why are no more people calling me, or what's going on? I'm just kind of sitting here.
Yeah, it's like the X factor. You have to find the X factor.
And you're like, no, that's not really enough. You could, So what has been your route for self-advocacy?
I've done, and this is mostly over the pandemic, that I've really tried to join a lot of community and reach out to a lot of people. Part of that's the podcast. I'm not doing the podcast isn't I'm not mixing records because I'm doing the podcast, but it's just meeting people. And people have to know that you exist in order for anyone to think about you for a job. So the more people you interact with, the more artists you support, the more communities you can be a part of, the more chances you have of some person somewhere giving you a gig or recommending you for a gig. I made a reference somewhere, I don't know where it was, to being a wallflower at a dance. Nobody nobody wants to dance with the wallflowers. Like the people that are like, they will be on the wall for the entire night, or you know what I mean? So it's
I think I heard you talking about this on your podcast.
Was it my podcast? Okay.